Hey y'all, I want to do a quick update here on our cover crop plot. You might be able to tell that it is just starting to rain a little bit, so we'll see how this goes. A couple weeks ago I did an update on it right before we got a freeze, and we did end up getting down into the low 30s, and it did kind of freeze off a lot of stuff. Since then we've had about 2 more freezes, getting down to about 30. So you can see here the sun hemp is completely dead. The sorghum is completely dead. The cowpeas down here, we've got volunteer wheat coming through them, but the cowpeas are pretty well dead. The phacelia is doing pretty well, actually. It's still going strong. You can even see it's putting on buds, and when I show you the mix planted 2 weeks earlier, it's still flowering out there. So the phacelia is doing good. The sunflowers are kind of still alive. You can see that the frost and the freeze has kind of nipped the top of them a little bit. These did not quite have a chance to flower, but we did have a lot of sunflowers blooming for quite a while. You can see this one here, planted 2 weeks earlier, was just barely frozen off too in the midst of flowering. We can see that our clovers here are doing really well. Our I think that was a crimson clover and our yellow sweet clover are growing really strong. The millet here is also pretty well dead. Our brassicas, which we've got purple top turnips right here, and our radishes are still going. Our safflower is still alive. Our peas are still going. They're still going pretty strong. And this other millet here is also frozen off. So you can see that some of these things, like in a situation like here where we're grazing on into the fall, there is still going to be some nutrition left in the millets and the sorghums. Obviously we have to be careful about the prussic acid and nitrates and stuff like that, and you know, just be conscious of that. And there is a little bit of feed value, but in terms of things continuing to grow and live on and take advantage of maybe some warm snaps that we have after the frosts, you can see that we still have some things that are continuing to grow. If we look out here, so this was planted the beginning part of August, this plot. If you look over here, this is the field that was seeded 2 weeks before that, kind of middle of July. You can see we've still got lots of all the brassicas growing down here. This is some of the clovers that are still growing. The phacelia, like I said, is still blooming here, which kind of surprised me. I don't know what I was expecting, but the phacelia is definitely cold tolerant, and wasn't able to take advantage of that. I've heard, if you look up like Steve Groff, he talks a lot about phacelia and how it really forms good relationships with mycorrhizal fungi networks and things like that. The oats you can see here that we had in this mix headed out actually, which has been some great extra energy feed for the calves that we've got there. I don't know if you can see them, they're way off in the distance there. Not that far away, but distance of the camera. So we do have some calves grazing this. I actually need to go move the fence for them a bit. But this is how things are going. The wheat is still growing in here. That's just volunteer wheat. And the oats, if you might remember a previous video, I said if I would do this mix again, I would plant a lot heavier oats, just because, you know, I look down here and there's a lot of soil that's just visible still. And in a situation like this where we're grazing things, I think oats would just be great to take advantage of that later fall grazing. If I was just going to grow this or plant this again and not graze it and just go for pure biomass accumulation, I probably would really up the sorghum Sudan that I've got in here, the sorghum, because that just grew really quick with that midsummer heat and that low moisture environment. And I would have seeded that thicker to get like total soil coverage. So it just kind of depends a little bit on what your goals are and what you're doing. Part of why I have so much brassicas here, well, it wasn't exactly intentional. You look out and you just see lots of leaves and coverage for them, and that wasn't necessarily intentional. They just tend to really branch out. You know, this one little seed in this one area is now covering this big of an area. So, you know, you really don't want to go more than about 2 to 3 pounds of brassicas, particularly these radishes and turnips that leaf and branch out, or if you would have a kale, possibly a forage kale. But you can see, like, we've got some really, like, look at this turnip. And that's my hand. It is a massive turnip. And so that the cows are out there, they'll actually eat that. And that's also just storing nutrients. That's a whole ball of nutrients right there. We could also look at some of these here radishes. You know, these sometimes get a lot of flack because they stick out of the ground so much, and they're sold as a deep tiller radish. And if you look, we'll maybe just pull this one up real quick. If it doesn't break off, it broke off. So, you know, there was a decent amount down there, and if we would have gotten a good pull on it, you would see that there is this, you know, it might even be just a tiny root going down, but that is breaking compaction. More than anything, if you look at this radish, that is nutrients. I mean, yeah, there's some water and stuff in there, but that's accumulated nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium that's sitting in there. It's not leaching away. And when we get to next year, I'm sticking that in the ground as if it's going to keep growing. It's probably done for. When we get to next spring and that starts to decompose and the biology starts to consume that, that's going to be in available forms. It's going to be in amino acids and different complex carbohydrates and things like that that the plants can just suck up right away and not have to spend energy making that themselves. So it's more than just doing tillage, it's also accumulating nutrients, I guess is where I'm going with that. So that's just kind of how things look out here. We have got some more cold weather in the forecast, and you can see already everything that's even mildly sensitive to frost or freezing is already, it's already killed off. Some of these, like this safflower, which is in here because I've heard that it has a root that really drills through compaction. Some of these things, like the sunflowers, have a good deep taproot that help with compaction, but sunflowers will still, if it reaches a really hard compacted layer, it'll still bottom out. Where I have heard, and I maybe should do some digging to find out, but I've heard that safflower will just drill through that compaction and keep going. So that's why the safflower's in here. The cows don't really like to eat it. It's kind of spiky. But it's not going to go to seed at this point. You can see it's maybe trying to do a bud and put a flower on, but it's not going to. It's run out of heat for the summer. And, you know, we've got oats here. I don't really care if the oats go to seed, but they're not mature enough. We did have, like, the sorghum has put on heads. I don't know if that is going to be mature enough to do anything. It probably won't. You know, we've got foxtail out here. That's probably going to be the biggest issue. It's one of the weeds of this field. And we have the millet here. Like, this is the millet that has put a seed head on. And, you know, when the cattle get out here, they might eat that. They'll probably eat those heads off. The birds will also love that. I bet there will be lots of wild turkeys. I know we've got pheasants in some of our fields. They're going to come out here and they're just going to really love some of these seeds. And, you know, the other thing is with, like, the millets and the sorghums, even the oats, there might be some volunteer seeds, but in these crops that we have cultivated over the years and kind of bred, the seeds are more fragile. They don't live in the soil as long as the weed seeds. So you have a foxtail seed like this here, and if that falls on the ground and doesn't get eaten by any crickets or any other bugs, that seed could live in the ground for, you know, years and years until the conditions are right, and then it'll sprout. Some of these other things, like the millets, might put a seed down, and, you know, maybe it'll last a year and then germinate. But generally, the way that we've bred them, so that, you know, we can eat them and they're more digestible to cattle and things like that, they just don't last as long in the environment. That's easier for the microbes to get in there, and the bugs and the crickets and the other wildlife to eat them and digest them, so they're no longer viable seeds. So that's why I'm not as worried about some of these things. Like there's this millet there, a different millet. I'm not as worried about them going to seed and being out here. You know, this velvet leaf buttonweed, I'd maybe be a little bit more worried about that, but they're out here, and part of why we've got this mix is to just cultivate lots of different roots and types of roots and different microbes, and so hopefully the soil conditions will have changed so that they're no longer as favorable for some of these weeds. That's the thought anyway. This will be a soybean field next year. We're gonna do some soybeans out this way, and we'll just see. We'll be able to tell pretty quickly if we've got a massive weed problem or if this has somehow solved some of the weed problems. You know, at the same time, I say that this could solve weed problems or make weed problems. To be honest, we're probably going to do some tillage in this field just to get ready for planting in the spring. And if we happen to time that tillage wrong, if it's too wet and we just create surface compaction, that could make its own weed challenge for us. So, you know, there's lots of little things you can do along the way to either help or hinder your goal in fighting weeds. This is an organic field, so we're not going to be spraying it. And so that's partly why I'm worried more about the weeds. But that's what we got. This is probably going to be my last update for you for quite a while. I might do another update middle of the winter or early spring just to kind of show you what survived for how long. Last year I had some radishes that survived into February before finally dying. And we'll just kind of see what lives for how long. I think everything except for some of these clovers and the volunteer wheat. Obviously, here's a big patch of volunteer wheat. Almost everything in this is going to winter kill. I expect it to here in northern Illinois. So I might give you an update just in the spring, like in the middle of the winter, to show you some of that. Then also in the spring to show you what it looks like. And then I'll hopefully update you as we go along. I don't know, you probably can't see it, but out there are birds that are trying to check out these sunflower heads. You know, there's lots of sunflower seeds here. Some people might be worried about that becoming a volunteer issue. We've grown sunflowers before, and we really have never had volunteer sunflowers be a major issue. Not the same way wild sunflowers are. That's going to be another place where the birds are just going to love this. It was kind of cool. Even after that first freeze, up until maybe a week ago, I was still seeing bees and pollinators out here checking out some of these flowers. I think most of them right now are kind of settling down for the winter, but if there would be a warm snap and we have some bees wake up, look at that phacelia there that they could go and just enjoy munching on. So that's where things are at now. I'm gonna go try to seed a wild or a native pollinator mix in between these two fields here. We planted wheat just there a couple days ago, and we're gonna put up a native pollinator strip in between there, just a little one, see what it does. It'll take a year or two to get established, but we want to work on that to kind of encourage the native pollinators and things around here, honeybees and other things. So that's where things are at. Hope you guys are having a good fall, and we'll catch you another time.